very pleased to introduce my colleague, Dr. Vicki Martin. So Vicki is an environmental social scientist based at the University of Queensland. Well, for a couple of days more.
Yes.
And then joining a really great organisation by the name of Mosaic Insights. So Vicki's research has a really strong focus on exploring people's connections to the natural world, very much to understand how we can better communicate with and engage the public in environmental management and conservation. Her current research, which you're presenting on today, is focused on marine spatial planning in the Marine Bay, the Morton Bay Marine Park. So I won't give away any spoilers, and I'll hand over to you, and I can see your screen perfectly. So
good, thank you, and thanks everyone for your time today. My research career started out on the Great Barrier Reef a very long time ago, and it's still my special place, and so it's a real it's very fulfilling to be part of this group again. But today I will be talking about a place much further south, of course, that's the Morton Bay Marine Park. So today I'll tell you a little bit about the project that we've been running in there, looking at social values or recreationist social values of Morton Bay. We'll reflect briefly on where we think the future of some of this sort of research can and should be going. And then I want to pause at the end to consider some real methodological challenges that are relevant for a lot of us doing any sort of survey research or research similar to this in any context. Okay, so here we go. So this whole project was instigated by a series of workshops. They were multi-stakeholder workshops at the end of 2021 to identify research priorities for the Morton Bay Marine Park. So one of those priorities is this idea of recreational boating and how boaters use and value the bay. And this is partly because we know that recreational boating is increasing in southeast Queensland. That little sharp uptick you can see in the middle there was the impact of the pandemic, and boating is expected to continue to increase. Now, these numbers come from the Maritime Safety Queensland, and it's just the numbers are the numbers of boats registered in the Brisbane region. So we know those pressures are going to continue to increase, and recreational boats are a particular, of particular interest to marine park managers because of their potential for impacts such as boat strikes on marine megafauna and anchoring impacts as well. But as many of you know, in less than 10 years' time, we've got the Olympics coming up, and there's events planned, but also all the consequential impacts that will flow on into the Morton Bay area is really starting to raise a lot of questions about how we manage and conserve the bay. So we set out, as I said, to understand how motorboaters are using and valuing the bay. We targeted any motorised vessels. So this is motorboats, jet skis, yachts, the bigger yachts with motors, that sort of thing. And it's of particular use to the Morton Bay Marine Park staff because they're just about to undergo a rezoning process for the entire marine park, and they've got lots of ecological data but not so much social data. So we use the Survey 123 platform to run an online survey. Some of you I know are familiar with this, many aren't. The difference between a platform like this and others like Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey is it allows us to ask a map-based question. So what we did is we went out and spoke to recreational boaters around the Morton Bay Marine Park region, and we asked them, amongst other questions, to drop a pin on a map to show us their favourite location that they enjoy boating to. Then a series of questions popped up about that particular location, what they do there, how often they visit it, their perceptions of which marine park zones it happens to be in, what the habitats are in that area. And then lastly, they went through a process of identifying the values that are relevant to them and the magnitude of those values. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. So, as I said, we went the length of the Morton Bay Marine Park, which is actually quite extensive. So it extends from Caloundra in the north to the Gold Coast Seaway in the south. There's over 360 islands in this area. You know, it's a really big space to try and cover. So we worked with Maritime Safety Queensland and identified the busiest boat ramps and tried to visit as many of those as possible. Oh, sorry, I should mention too, we also used leaflet drops. So whenever we saw vehicles parked with boat trailers, we had a leaflet and a little card with a QR code to the survey. So we did lots of those sorts of leaflet drops. We sent a few emails out through the Queensland Recreational Boating Council and the member organisations, so lots of the boating clubs. Whitworth's Marine and Leisure stores had a special little sign up for us, and we did a very small amount of promotion on the UQ School of Earth and Environmental Sciences Facebook page as well. So in terms of respondents, after we cleaned out the dodgy respondents, I will talk to you more about that a bit later. We ended up with 304 valid responses. 80% of them were male, so this is very similar to what we know about registered boat owners, which are 86% male, according to Maritime Safety Queensland. The average age was 51 years. We had very few, almost no people who identified it as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. And then in terms of education, the most common level of education was trade or professional certificate, followed very closely by bachelor's and then postgraduate degrees. So we've got quite a lot of highly educated people in here. But we don't know enough about the boating population in general to know whether this is representative or not, and more about that later too. In terms of the primary boat that they use on the Moreton Bay Marine Park area, you can see there that it's almost split between open roundabouts, cabin cruisers, yachts and sailboats, and then we had about 8% on jet skis. So these are the locations that they told us were their favourite locations. What we see here is that it corresponds with the anecdotal data that we've got from marine parks. So there are two key hotspots, so Tangaluma Wrecks and just off the edge of Moreton Island there in the north, and Peel Island, which is not far off Cleveland and Manly, so in between sort of Brisbane and the North Stradbroke Island. So these dots tell us where people like to go in the bay, but they don't tell us why. And so to find out why, we used Kellett's framework of human values of nature. So this framework has been through decades of research on, you know, the interactions and values that people place on being in nature or interacting with wildlife. And we know that other researchers have applied this framework in analysis of some text from interviews in the Moreton Bay Marine Park as well. So we started with that. There are other frameworks out there, but what we found is in this area of public participation in GIS type social research, there's been really inconsistent approaches to doing this. So some will use some of these values and others that they think are relevant. They're perhaps there's not always a lot of description of how they developed the list of values. So we can only assume that they're educated guesses. I don't want to say made up, but there's also problems with them. And we know that some of the frameworks have used recreation as a value, whereas from a social science perspective, if we're including behaviours or activities like recreation mixed in with these other relational values, it can cause some problems with the results. And when you remove those, you get quite different findings. I'm happy to talk to anyone who's interested in that at some other time, but for the rest of you, I won't bore you with it. And what we did is we took this framework and we did a lot of testing. We interviewed 30 recreational boaters in an open-ended way and saw how their descriptions of the reasons why they value particular locations matched up with this framework. And we found that all of these particular values appeared in that analysis, but also 3 more. Now, these 3, it's not rocket science. They do appear in some other people's values frameworks, but not so much in the Kellett's. So we've added in this concept of sharing the experience with other people, being uncrowded, so having that solitude, and therapeutic reasons. So people are going out there for, you know, rest and relaxation, or just get away from it all. Now, in the interest of visual sort of readability, I've just presented the top 6 value types that were selected by our respondents here. There were 14 altogether, but the top 6, you can see the first 2, appreciating the natural beauty of this place and experiencing nature. At 3, therapeutic reasons as well, are selected by almost all of the respondents. So those top 2 are very environmental, centric, and the next 2 are very human centric. So that therapeutic reasons and sharing the experience with others. This to us was interesting because in our workshops, we heard marine parks say, you know, they just want to see people value the Moreton Bay Marine Park the same way they do. And so what we can see here is that those environmental values are really strong for these respondents. Then what we did is we asked each of the respondents to select which of the values were relevant to them, and then out of that selected list, they could apply a budget of 100 points across each of the values that they selected. So this would tell us which values were more important than others, so the magnitude of each value type. So what we end up seeing, whoops, sorry, I've just bumped my keyboard. What we end up seeing is that there's different size circles on these maps, and these maps are of each value type, and that they vary looking across the different values. So experiencing nature here on the left has far more circles and bigger circles than the map on the far right there, studying and learning about natural features. So we can go through each of these maps and have a look at how those values change. So we can see that people hold multiple values for particular locations, and that the magnitude or importance of each of those values changes as well. So they're just some examples to show you. They are available online, and I'll give you that link shortly. But it's not really all that useful to look at the entire Morton Bay Marine Park for management purposes. But what we can do is zoom in on these hotspots, Tangaluma here, for example, and see that the top 2 values there are experiencing nature and appreciating the natural beauty of the area. So those, that's red and green in the pie chart there. So those 2 values are, the main drivers for people to go here. That's followed closely by those therapeutic and sharing the experience with others. So that's the sort of yellowy and the dark blue pieces of the pie chart. And this is what it looks like for Peel Island. So you can see that red and green changes a little bit. They're still the most important, but it's followed pretty closely by these therapeutic reasons. And so these are useful bits of information to keep in mind if you're a marine park manager and you're considering any sort of changes in the use or perhaps facilities or any other changes in that area. You can understand a bit more about why people are going there and what they value most. So whether there's likely to be conflict over any sort of changes, or perhaps an opportunity for people to come together and support management decisions too, particularly around conserving the natural environment. So we do have a story map being developed. You're more than welcome to take a look at it, as long as you understand it's still under development. We're still getting our results finalised and putting them up there on the maps, but feel free to take a look. So it's a bit.ly link, Morton Bay study. And then you can click on the results tab near the top and then scroll down and see all of those maps. So just to reflect briefly on where we'd like to take this research in the future, what we'd really like to do is work more with the end users. So we have been working with marine parks to help inform the project as it progressed, but work out what are the really useful values that we can incorporate into frameworks and any other information needs that they might have. We're also keen to identify the values of other user groups. So we've only got the recreational motorboaters in here, but of course there's plenty of other user groups which may vary quite dramatically, we suspect. Perhaps not, given that motorboaters are actually more interested in the environment than perhaps was assumed. But also, you know, we would like to work much more closely with other interest groups, stakeholders, and particularly rights holders. Now, we did initially work with the traditional owners in the area, and as some of you know, there's been a bit of a halt to communications there across the board. So this is a very short-term project, and it certainly hasn't been long enough to develop the relationships that we need to there, but there's other problems beyond our control that are influencing the traditional owner engagement in the Morton Bay area. And the other thing we'd like to do is look at how we can apply, adjust and apply the framework for other locations and contexts. Like, wouldn't it be cool to do it on the Great Barrier Reef as well? So just to finish off, I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about methodological issues. For us, there were sampling challenges. So, you know, finding out more about, I'll go into each of these topics in a bit more detail. So we'll look at sampling challenges, the importance of testing survey instruments, talk a little bit about Survey 123, the pros and cons, and we'll finish up with a strong note on survey fraud, which is affecting anyone doing surveys these days. So in terms of sampling challenges, we had a real challenge in working out what is representative. So we have really good data on age group, gender. That's about it, I think, from Maritime Safety Queensland, but that's just on people who have registered motorboats in the area. So yachts are not required to be registered. Some are registered, but not the majority are not. And then, of course, the registrant data doesn't tell us anything about everybody else on board as well. So we don't have a good idea about who it is that goes boating in the Moreton Bay Marine Park. So we've got questions around representativeness. Recruiting hard to reach respondents is always a challenge. We did try to reach out to some traditional owners in the area, but we're still coming up against challenges there. Not that they're not interested, it's just I suspect that we still don't have the relationships that we need to progress this, and that's recruiting them as recreational users, to include them as traditional owners and understand their perspectives on values of the area from that much broader view is a completely different ballgame, and certainly beyond the scope of this particular project, but should be something to consider in the future. And finally, we had a lot of challenges with trying to find a survey panel provider who could give us a sample of survey participants that could take our survey. So initially we had put aside we had plans to get about 500 respondents via a survey panel. Unfortunately, due to us using Survey 123, we simply were not able to get that particular platform to work with the survey panel providers' platforms. So they were not able to connect us with the survey respondents at all. We tried 3 reputable providers around the country, and unfortunately we just hit a wall with all of them. So we gave up on that idea, and it ended up doing a lot more field work than we had initially planned. I do want to highlight the importance of thorough testing. Often we see surveys are just given a quick whip around, perhaps the team, and we check for wording or typos or whatever. But in my experience, not just with this, but running surveys in other countries and other parts of Australia, it's really, really important to make sure that you're testing it with a sample of the audience that you're trying to target. So what we did is did our internal testing with our team. Then we found 30 boaters around the region, initially people who were familiar to us, so our friendly testers, and then moved out to other testers who were are not known to us. And this just ended up in multiple rounds of revisions, not just on the question wording and response options, but we were looking at the platform usability. So, how easy it was to use Survey 123, how easy it was to use some devices that we had as well to take out into the field, and to test for browser issues as well. And I can't emphasize enough how valuable it was to sit next to people doing this survey and watch them interact with the survey and identify potential problems. So I think we ended up with a much more robust instrument in the end because of this testing. Then in terms of Survey 123, it was really great because it enabled us to use a map-based question, and we didn't find any other platforms that we're familiar with that we were able to do that. So we couldn't do it in Qualtrics. There were all sorts of problems with the other sort of more common survey platforms. And it did provide a nice, clean, intuitive interface for our respondents. So that was really great. It was a steep learning curve for programming because it operates quite differently to programming in Qualtrics or any of those other standard survey platforms. We did encounter some limitations on the question format, so we had to be quite creative with the way we were able to ask some of the questions. As I said, we weren't able to integrate it with some of our panel providers that we tried. And in particular, we found that there was limited ability to prevent survey fraud. So this is the final bit I want to just talk about. Survey fraud now is a big issue for anyone running a survey, anyone who is promoting it publicly. So this might be via email or social media. Even in our little tiny survey, which was not well promoted beyond our own interactions with people. We definitely came across about 11% survey fraud. So this is where people are taking it and possibly testing bots or wanting to go into, we had a prize draw, wanting to go into our prize draw, although I doubt it. We had some really dodgy responses in there, and initially they weren't easy to detect. So there's two main problems that we are finding in almost all surveys. So every single survey that I've been involved with one way or another, whether it's someone else's survey and I'm working with their data or our own surveys, we're finding that there are fraudulent responses. So there's two main types. There's the respondents who just simply don't care, or they want to cheat to get paid in these survey panels, or they're just not paying attention. So that's a real human taking it. But more and more, we're also encountering survey bots. So this is something that people are obviously doing. They're running their AI to take these paid surveys and, you know, get the financial reward at the end of it. Now, what can you do to detect and reduce survey fraud? There's actually a ton of different things you can do. I'm not going to go into all of these, but it's just really important to be aware of best practice, aware of the issues, and aware of what you can do to prevent it. There is a paper, a reference at the bottom there. A few colleagues and I wrote about this issue and what you can do to improve the data quality, basically, in your social science surveys. So although it's in conservation biology, although it's conservation focused, it's applicable to any online surveys these days. And I just want to point out two things here that you can do that we found really useful for the Morton Bay survey. So using open-ended questions to check for genuine responses. So sometimes you'll see just garbled text, and then sometimes you'll see text that's a little bit funny, like a little bit odd. And what we're finding is now they're able to at least get a sense of the topic of the questionnaire or the question itself, and they can scrape data off or text off the internet, and they put in maybe a paragraph that you know, normal, genuine people won't write. So one simple way we could check on some of these dodgy ones is copy and paste it into Google, and then straight away we can see they're scraping data from like the Marine Park's website, for example. And we had a prize draw, so we asked for their contact details, and we checked some of those as well, and they were definitely dodgy. So there's a few useful things you can do, but yeah, it really pays to know that this is a problem and build in, like, plan for survey fraud. Make sure you're talking to reputable panel providers, for example, and agree with them before you launch your survey, you know, what the conditions are for rejecting any data that you're not happy with. Because at the end of the day, you need to stand behind the data that you're analysing. So if you can't do that, yeah, you'll need to rethink things. Anyway, so that's it from me. As I said, or no, as Tracy said, sorry, I am moving to Mosaic Insights. So still doing environmental social science, just doing it in a slightly different way. So from April, you can reach me there at mosaicinsights.com.au. Please feel free to reach out. I'd love to continue collaborating, and very happy to be saying that one of the projects I'll work on there is based on the Great Barrier Reef. So happy to be coming back to working in this space. Thank you, and let me know if you've got questions.